At this time, I would like to invite the Elisabeth Haub School of Law Dean Horace Anderson to begin the event with introductory remarks. Dean Anderson.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning. I'm Horace Anderson, Dean of the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. And it is my pleasure to help welcome you on behalf of the law school and on behalf of the university today. We're honored to have the opportunity to award the 2021 Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy to two individuals who have worked tirelessly in different ways and in different parts of the world to defend the environment. We are honored this year to shine a light on the impressive work of Ugandan climate justice advocate Vanessa Nakate and the work of Professor Wang, an environmental law scholar and advocate with Kunming University of Science and Technology in China. Ms. Nakate will receive the Haub Award in recognition of her citizen diplomacy in bringing the voice of her generation to global environmental campaigns, and also in recognition of her inspiring climate activism in Uganda and beyond. Professor Wang, who is the director of the Platform for Research on Ecological Civilization and Environmental Rule of Law at Kunming University, and who is one of the top environmental law experts in China, will receive the Haub Award in recognition of his outstanding contributions to the formulation of environmental law in China. The Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy was established in 1997 by the Elisabeth Haub Law School in cooperation with the Haub family to honor the legacy of Elisabeth Haub, a noted philanthropist and advocate for strong laws for the conservation of nature. The award is chosen yearly by an esteemed jury of individuals and was first established to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the United Nations Stockholm Conference and the 5th anniversary of the United Nations Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. Since the founding of this award, Pace University has participated in bestowing the award on laureates from around the world who have promoted policies and practices that have made our planet a more sustainable and just place. In 2016, the law school cemented our long-standing relationship with the family of Elisabeth Haub when we became the Elisabeth Haub School of Law. We are proud to bear her name, as she was a steadfast voice for the environment and a pioneering advocate of strong international environmental laws to protect our planet. We are pleased to have with us today Lilian Haub, a Pace University trustee and a passionate environmental advocate in her own right. She will help present the Haub Award today. We are also pleased to have with us several members of our faculty and of the distinguished Haub Award jury. We thank you for volunteering your time to recognize exceptional accomplishments in the field of environmental law and diplomacy. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Pace University's president, Marvin Krislov, a lawyer by training who is also deeply concerned with preserving our environment and committed to supporting the efforts of Haub Law and of our environmental law program. I will now turn the virtual podium, over to President Krislov.
Thank you, Dean Anderson. Colleagues, distinguished guests, today's honorees, Pace trustee Lilian Haub, hello. Welcome to this very important event. I'm very happy to be here. The Elisabeth Haub Award for Law and Diplomacy is the most prestigious environmental law and diplomacy prize in the world. Elisabeth Haub was devoted to the progress of environmental law. She was in many ways a woman before her time. She recognized the impact that human development had on the world's environment, and she advocated for policies that would preserve and protect the planet and natural resources. It is our great honor to celebrate her legacy and to bestow upon two remarkable honorees this award. Professor Wang of Kunming University of Science and Technology in China has had a long and distinguished career as an environmental law scholar and advocate, and Vanessa Nakate, a Ugandan climate justice activist, is a leading voice in bringing attention to the impact of climate change on Africa and Africans. To both of you, congratulations and thank you for your critical work. For decades, we at PACE have had the privilege of recognizing luminaries and trailblazers in environmental law and diplomacy, people who have made a lasting impact on the environmental world order. I welcome the many environmental advocates and scholars from around the world who are attending this event today, and I also salute our dedicated students and distinguished faculty from the Elisabeth Haub School of Law. Thank you all for being here. Finally, I want to recognize Lilian Haub, who is a fierce environmental advocate and a committed member of the Pace University Board of Trustees. She is here today as well. Lilian, your family's bold commitment to the environment and your strong partnership with Pace University and the law school are symbolized by this medal. We are honored to work side by side with you and your family as we strengthen the Elisabeth Haub School of Law, train the environmental advocates of the future, continue and advance the work of those who have received the award, and live up to the legacy of Elisabeth Haub. I am pleased now to introduce the moderator of our distinguished panel today, Professor Smita Narula. Professor Narula is the first person to hold the Haub Distinguished Chair of International Law at our Elisabeth Haub School of Law. Her work is dedicated to the promotion and protection of human rights and to social and ecological justice. She and her team have also worked tirelessly to put on this very impressive event. Thank you for that, Professor Narula. I now turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, President Krislav, and thank you, Dean Anderson. Greetings and a very, very warm welcome to all who are in attendance today. We are joined today by environmental advocates and activists, UN and government officials, and scholars and students from around the globe. We are also joined by Haub jury members and several past recipients of the Haub Award. We ask to begin for your patience with any internet or technology issues that might arise. Our participants are coming to you from varied locations across several time zones. This year's Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy is noteworthy in several key respects. To begin, it comes on the heels of a vote by the UN Human Rights Council just this past week to finally recognize for the very first time the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, paving the way, we hope, for the recognition of this right by the UN General Assembly. It also comes weeks before the next global climate summit to be held in Glasgow, where the eyes of the world will be on world leaders to see whether they will, in fact, rise to the occasion and take bold climate action. It also comes on the heels of Indigenous Peoples Day, commemorated here in the United States yesterday, where Indigenous activists and others marched to the White House demanding that US President Biden declare a national climate emergency, as many have been asking their governments to do around the globe. This year's award also follows on the decision of the Haub Award jury to confer last year's award in memoriam to environmental defenders who lost their lives defending their land and the environment from destructive industries. The NGO Global Witness documented a record 227 killings of environmental defenders in the year 2020. That's an average of more than 4 people a week who were killed defending their homes, land, and livelihoods, and ecosystems vital for biodiversity and the climate. We continue to stand in solidarity with environmental defenders around the world. As members of the Haub Award jury, we recognize that the need to protect our environment is becoming more urgent by the day, and that frontline defenders continue to pay the ultimate price for their efforts to defend our planet, our only home. The 2 laureates whom we honor today also bring that same sense of urgency and resolve to this struggle, a struggle that is increasingly being led by youth activists. In recognition of their leadership, we are proud this year to highlight the intergenerational nature of leadership in the environmental realm by conferring the Haub Award on 2 laureates who I am very pleased to introduce to you now. Professor Wang receives the award for his outstanding contributions to the formulation of environmental laws in China and his international leadership in enabling academic exchanges between Chinese environmental law scholars and their overseas counterparts under the framework of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Notably, Professor Wang is the first Chinese national to receive the Elisabeth Haub Award. Congratulations, Professor Wang. The advancement of environmental law in the largest and fastest growing economy in the world is of vital importance to the advancement of global environmental law. Dr. Wang is considered one of the top environmental law experts in China and holds important environmental positions with the government of China. He is director of the Platform for Research on Ecological Civilization and Environmental Rule of Law at China's Kunming University of Science and Technology. Prior to joining Kunming in 2019, he taught at Shanghai Jiaotong University from 2002 to 2018, and at Wuhan University from 1984 to 2001. Dr. Wang is a member of the academic committee of the Key Institute of Education Ministry of the People's Republic of China for the field of environmental law. He is also vice chairman of the Chinese Society of Environmental and Resources Law. And in addition to teaching, he has provided legal consultation on environmental law for Chinese national and local legislatures and international organizations. Perhaps most significantly, Dr. Wang was requested by the Chinese government to recommend a complete revision of China's environmental laws. And in that connection, to analyze which features of US environmental laws might help inform China's own revisions. For the initial drafts of this analysis, he worked closely with Haub Law's Dean Emeritus, Richard Ottinger, and other leading environmental scholars. Impressively, virtually all of their joint work on this project was accepted and adopted by the People's Republic of China. Our next laureate, Vanessa Nakate, is a climate justice activist from Uganda who has drawn global attention to the impact of climate change on poverty, hunger, disease, conflict, and violence against women and girls. Ms. Nakate is the first Ugandan national to receive the Haub Award and is also the youngest recipient of the award. Congratulations, Ms. Nakate. She was the first Friday for Future climate activist in Uganda and is the founder of the Rise Up Climate movement, which seeks to amplify the voices of activists from Africa. Ms. Nakate has spearheaded a global campaign to save Congo's rainforest, which is facing massive deforestation, and is working on a project that involves installation of solar and institutional stoves in schools. Ms. Nakate advocates for helping women in their daily lives and recognizes that climate justice is not possible without addressing the challenges that women face. Ms. Nakate also launched the Green Schools Project, which aims to bring solar and eco-friendly stoves to schools in Uganda. The Green Schools Project also educates parents, teachers, and students on the benefits of a transition to renewable energy. She also spearheaded the campaign Save Congo Rainforest, which has spread to other countries in Africa and Europe. She has received prominent recognition for her work, including in Time Magazine, Oprah Daily, Vogue, and BBC. Ms. Nakate holds a degree in business administration in marketing from Makerere University Business School. Her book, entitled A Bigger Picture, My Fight to Bring a New African Voice to the Climate Crisis, is set to come out this fall. We're going to begin with some questions for Ms. Nakate and then for Professor Wang. Then we will engage in dialogue with both laureates. And following our discussion, we will turn to you as our audience for your questions. Following our moderated conversation, PACE trustee Lilian Haub will officially confer the award, after which each laureate will share some remarks in acceptance of their award. We will then close the ceremony with a few words from Professor Nicholas Robinson. I ask Vanessa Nakate to now join me on the screen. Welcome, Ms. Nakate, and a warm congratulations to you once again.
Thank you so much.
So, Ms. Nakate, earlier in your journey as a climate justice activist, you were cropped out of a photo taken by the Associated Press at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. You were also not referenced in the press release following a press conference that you were asked to speak at for that event. In response, you tweeted, "You didn't just erase a photo, you erased a continent, but I am stronger than ever." You also added in an interview with CNN that the incident pointed to a wider issue of erasure of African voices in climate action conversations. Can you elaborate on this wider issue and to how this particular incident affected you as an individual and how it informed your activism?
Yeah, thank you so much. Personally, this incident at the time was very frustrating and very hurting to see the picture and to also read the article. However, that wasn't the end of the story. At that point, I just wanted to ask the why question. Why wasn't I in this picture? And yet I remember I was with the whole group when the picture was taken, and then followed the support from, millions and thousands of people from different parts of the world asking the same question of why. And to me, this moment really mattered. It wasn't just about a picture being removed from the conversation. It was a message being removed, a story being removed. Every activist has a story to tell, and every story has a solution to give, and every solution has a life to change. We can only have climate justice if it includes everyone, but erasure of voices and stories of activists, especially from the most affected areas and the most affected communities, will not enable us to have climate justice. How can you talk about climate justice if those at the front lines are not included? And those at the front lines are the ones least responsible for the climate crisis. So I think that to have climate justice, we have to include every voice. We have to include communities that are suffering loss and damage right now, because these communities will not be able to adapt to some of the things that they are losing to the climate crisis. We won't be able to adapt to lost histories or cultures or traditions. We will lose everything if nothing is done. But it starts with listening to us and taking the action that we are demanding for.
We're so grateful to you, Ms. Nakate, for raising your voice, and as you have done, raising the voice not only of a continent, but all of those who are feeling the effects of climate change on the front lines. And as you have pointed out very poignantly, are also those who have contributed least to the crisis. Those who have contributed the least are the ones who are bearing the greatest costs. Your book is coming out, congratulations, next month, A Bigger Picture, My Fight to Bring a New African Voice to the Climate Crisis. How does the book illustrate and frame your call for both environmental and social justice on behalf of those who have been omitted from the climate discussion and who are now demanding to be heard? And in addition to that, if you could share with us, what does climate justice look like to you?
Yeah, thank you so much. Climate justice means including every community, including stories and demands of every community. And to me, climate justice is literally everything that surrounds us, everything that is next to us. The climate crisis affects every sector of our lives. We won't be able to eradicate poverty without climate justice. We won't be able to achieve gender equality without climate justice. We won't be able to achieve zero hunger in our communities without climate justice. There won't be peace, there won't be good health without climate justice. So you realize that climate justice is everything that pertains to our lives. It's everything that pertains to our survival. It's everything that pertains to our present and our future. So without climate justice, it will be very hard for us to achieve the rest of the sustainable development goals. And I make this so clear in my book. It will be interesting for people to see these intersections, these interconnections. It's not just one thing. Climate is not just the weather, it's not just the statistics. It is everything that connects to our living. It's everything that connects to our survival. And that is what I think climate justice really is. So I will tell you, climate justice is social justice. Climate justice is gender equality. Climate justice is achieving zero hunger. Climate justice is eradicating poverty. Climate justice is peace. So it is literally everything. And I do my best to really explain these intersections in the book for people to get to understand and try to make the connections and know that when we fight for climate justice, we are fighting for everything. I also I also talk about key issues on how some people are disproportionately affected by climate change, especially girls and women. I come from a society where the community has decided on what roles women and girls are supposed to do. And many times these roles are a responsibility of providing food, providing water, providing firewood for their families. So many women and girls are at the front lines when climate disasters occur. They are the ones working on the farms. They're the ones to walk long distances in case of dry spells. And also when families have lost everything to the climate crisis, children sometimes are forced to drop out of school, and many times it is the girls who are forced to drop out of school. Some are unfortunately even forced into early marriages. So I try my best to really explain these things so people understand the connection with everything. Climate justice is everything around us.
I deeply personally really appreciate the ways in which you really explain and put into our consciousness the interconnected nature of these issues and these struggles, and are incredibly intersectional in your approach, especially in showing the gender-based impacts of climate change and calling for a gender-based response to the climate crisis. On October 1st, you took part in the student strike in Milan with local and international activists demanding real systems change based on climate justice. A few days prior, during your keynote at pre-COP26, the Youth for Climate Conference, you shared the following, and we have a video clip of you.
Everywhere I go, leaders fall over themselves to say how they will achieve net zero by such and such a date to mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis. Sometimes I hear leaders talk about the need to fund adaptation efforts where mitigation will no longer be enough. And as we know, there are far too little evidence of the $100 billion per year that was promised to help climate vulnerable countries to meet these challenges. In fact, those funds were promised to arrive by 2020, and we are still waiting. But there is one thing I almost never hear leaders talk about, and that is loss and damage. For many of us, reducing and avoiding is no longer enough. You cannot adapt to lost cultures. You cannot adapt to lost traditions. You cannot adapt to lost history. You cannot adapt to starvation.
Following that incredibly powerful speech and a thunderous round of applause, you also added, "You cannot adapt to extinction." Ms. Nakate, can you speak more to the gap between the promises that world leaders have been making and the realities of frontline communities and its impact on the climate crisis? And especially, what would you like to see happen next month at COP26, the next major global climate summit?
Yeah, I will start from the last question. What I hope to see is real action, drastic action from the leaders. We've had leaders talk about promises, talk about the actions they're going to take, but they never do that. So what we've received from leaders has been empty promises. It has been empty phrases. It has been empty sentences. It has been empty summits and empty conferences. Sweet words, but they never result to anything. Sweet promises, but they never result to anything. It's almost a moment where you feel like, oh, the leaders are finally listening. The leaders are finally paying attention. And they think we are inspiring, like they always say, but they never really take the action that we are demanding them for. So what I really want to see in the coming month is that if leaders, governments, corporations are talking about going net zero by 2030, it has to start now. If they're talking about halving emissions by 2040 or 2030, it has to start now. it doesn't make sense to make a promise of net zero by 2030 and continue to open up new coal power plants. It doesn't make sense to say young people are so inspiring and continue to construct new oil pipelines. It doesn't make sense to say the future belongs to the young people. They are going to save the world and you continue to frack gas. Leaders must understand that we cannot eat coal, we cannot drink oil, and we cannot breathe so-called natural gas. So what I expect from leaders is real action that prioritizes the lives of the people and our planet. It's time to rise up for the people and the planet.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nakate. Thank you for raising your voice. Thank you so much for these insights that you have shared and for contributing so meaningfully and powerfully to what I hope is a movement for us all in the direction of taking real critical climate action, including on the issue of loss and damage, which you have raised several times, which made its way into the Paris Agreement, but without any promises of financial payment or any indication of liability on the part of those who are emitting, but not necessarily feeling the greatest impacts of the climate crisis. Thank you so, so much. I will come back to you, Ms. Nakate, in our joint conversation, and I now request Professor Wang to join us. Thank you, Ms. Nakate.
You're welcome.
Welcome, Professor Wang. You are being honored here today for your pivotal role in the development of environmental laws in China and on the international stage. Congratulations once again to you. I guess we wanted to start by asking you, what inspired you initially to use your legal training to advance environmental protection?
Thank you. Thank you, Smita, Professor Smita Narula. Thank you for your question. I think at least there are 4 factors which can be, say, inspiring my initially to use my knowledge to advance environmental protection. The first factor is, I think, come from my parents and the teachers at my elementary school and the middle school and the college. Yeah, they always, all of them, there's one thing common from all of them is to be a person useful for community. So since I was young, this is, I remember this very clearly. When I become an adult, I want to be a person useful for the society. Yeah. The second factor happened in 1977 when China started the open up and reform. That is the big change. In 1977, Mr. Deng Xiaoping and the government of China decided to restore the college entrance exam. So I was able to take the exam and get into the university. In my university, I studied at the beginning Chinese language and literature. For my teacher there, I encountered a term called comparative literature. So I know literature is comparable. I feel very curiosity about that term. That can be a big aha moment for me, you know. So the third one, when I get into the graduate study stage, in 1982, the United Nations passed the law of convention, the law of the sea of convention. Yeah. So my teacher, my academic supervisor, Professor Hander Pei, suggests me to have a study on the marine environmental protection part of the convention. So I did. So that is the real beginning of my environmental law study. Yeah. The last one, the fourth factor is the Chinese environmental legislation, the booming of Chinese environmental legislation in 1980s, in the later 1970s and the all 1980s. The Chinese Congress made a lot of environmental laws. So by that time, I realized environmental law is a new and important area which need a lot of people to make a contribution to. So all of those four factors inspired me to decide to work in this area.
Professor Wang Shi, I'm incredibly moved by your response, and especially starting with your parents. We are talking today about having an intergenerational award, and I so appreciate your reaching back to your parents and their generation and what they taught you to be somebody who is responsible and contributes to their community. I would be remiss not to say that, to not take this opportunity to say that my own mother is watching us today, and along with my father also instilled a lot of those same principles in me. I appreciate your sharing that. Also, the role of teachers and of students in this process becomes, and what they teach us becomes critical. Virtually all of your recommendations regarding a complete revision of China's environmental laws were, I think Professor Wang Shi might be having connection issues. We'll just wait for a moment for that to resolve. Professor Wang Shi, are you able to reconnect? All right, I'm going to ask Claire if you could bring Vanessa back on the screen while we wait for Professor Wang Shi to reconnect. Hello, Ms. Nakate. I wanted to follow up with a question that has been on my mind quite a lot lately, and it's around issues of we are entering into a phase where the climate crisis is literally at our doorstep. You talk about it very poignantly with regard to the African continent and elsewhere. And we see through wildfires, through rising sea levels, through daily reminders and very profound reminders that the climate crisis is here with us now. That also gives rise to an enormous amount of eco-anxiety and grief and almost paralysis. I joke, but not really joke, with my students that I feel a profound responsibility for their mental health in teaching them about climate change and what's happening. I would love to hear from you. What do you believe is the best antidote to that grief and that anxiety, and what you do to overcome that and continue to stay active in the work that you do? And what would you tell our students and your generation about how to get involved in that work?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll start with the last question. Getting involved is, I think, what really the really first step in getting involved is, asking the how question. It already shows that you want to get involved, and that's really very important. And to me, I think activism comes in a number of ways. Some people feel comfortable doing activism from their homes. Others feel comfortable going to the streets. Others feel comfortable doing activism in schools. So I think it's important to know what you want to do in activism. And if you want to go to the streets, you're always welcome. I can say there are many climate groups, Fridays for Future, Rise Up movement, that are in different parts of the world. It's very easy to connect with those groups and work with them to join maybe the next climate strike. And then about anxiety or the feeling of depression because of activism and the failure for leaders to take action, or the fear of what the future holds. To me, I felt that before. I felt that feeling of discouragement and feeling like the leaders and seeing what we are seeing. They are not giving much care to our present, they're not giving much care to our future. But there is one thing that keeps me standing, amidst all these things, and that is hope. I think that hope is a very powerful tool to have in activism. This, feeling you're fighting for, you can actually achieve it, and you will, if necessary. And I believe that another world is possible.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nakate. And thank you for that very uplifting message, which I also often need to hear myself. Professor Wang is back with us, and I will now return to speaking with him, and we'll ask you to join us in a few moments. Thank you. Professor Wang. We can see you, but your camera, I believe, is off. Or we see your presence. Are you able to hear me? Professor Wang, are you able to hear me? All right, perhaps we will continue to try while Professor Wang continues to fix his internet connection. I think if there are any questions that are coming from the audience for Ms. Nakate, we can start to ask those. Oh, there we are. Hello, Professor Wang. Welcome back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
welcome back.
Yeah.
Lovely to have you back. Okay.
Thank you.
Of course, no problem at all. So virtually, the next question I wanted to pose is virtually all of the recommendations, your recommendations regarding a complete revision of China's environmental laws were accepted and adopted by the Chinese government, which is quite an impressive feat. And as we said at the beginning of the event, an incredibly important one as well, because this is the fastest growing economy in the world. And what happens in China affects the globe. So you are not only contributing to your community around you, but also to the global community in the work that you are doing. What, in your view, are the most immediate and important next steps that China must take to further the advancement of environmental law nationally?
Okay, thank you. I think the answer I have the answer for two levels. Okay, first level is the domestic at the national level. The second level is international level. Okay, so for nationally, I think in order to further the environmental law, we need to do at least 4 things. The first one is to strengthen environmental enforcement. The second one is to strengthen the supervision to environmental regulators. Yeah. Because if there is no supervision to the regulators, they may not vigorously enforce environmental law. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the third one is to strengthen the environmental law compliance of enterprises or all kinds of polluters. Okay, they need to to discipline themselves. If my English is good. Okay, and the fourth one, very important, is to enhance environmental morality or environmental ethic, okay, for the whole society. And in terms of international level, there are many things we need to do, just as Vanessa just mentioned a lot. Okay, at this moment, I want to point 3 of them. One is to enhance international cooperation in the area of climate change. Okay. And China recently has proposed its goal of carbon emission peak by 2030 and carbon neutralization by the year of 2060. Yeah. And this is a great target for China. I think if China achieves those targets, it will be a good contribution to the global control of carbon emission. Okay, and currently, as far as I know, Chinese government and enterprises now is trying very hard to achieve those targets. Okay. And internationally, the second point is to strengthen international cooperation in the area of COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, this is a new challenge to the whole world. Currently, the Chinese citizen, the population of Chinese citizen to whom injected the vaccine the number has reached 1 billion. So 80% of Chinese people have got the vaccine shot. Okay. And internationally, we need to cooperate to help countries in developing world. And those developing countries are now in a difficult condition to get enough vaccine. And the third one in terms of international level is biodiversity. Okay. And I just mentioned today is the day the Biodiversity Convention COP15 is held in China, in Kunming, in my city. And I know that the chairman of Chinese, Mr. Xi Jinping, the chairman of China, has announced in the COP15 that China will have 1.5 billion yuan to establish a biodiversity fund. Yeah. And he is calling on all of the nations to support this initiative, to build up this fund and to help the whole world, especially for the developing countries, to fight against the loss of biodiversity. I personally feel very good about this initiative. Okay, this is my answer to your question.
I think you've really, by pointing to, thank you for such a comprehensive answer, and also nationally, and we'll talk about it with Ms. Nakate momentarily, but the issue of enforcement is, and implementation of the commitments really is, there's sort of two gaps. There's the ambition, climate ambition gap around what is actually called for or committed to, and then secondly, there's the gap of what is committed to and then what is enforced. And we'll talk a little bit more about implementation, but I also wanted to recognize and appreciate, and we'll talk about the COVID-19 pandemic with Ms. Nakate as well, how you're bringing vaccine equity into the conversation and also signaling to China its own, that it also has a leadership role to play, as does the US and other countries, in ensuring vaccine equity throughout the world, and particularly in the global South, where there is great suffering as a result of the COVID pandemic, as there is here. I wanted to actually conclude with you, Professor Wang, with a question we have from an audience member. It's a question from Ben Boer, who is Professor Emeritus of the University of Sydney, a dear friend of Haub Law School, and I believe a dear friend of yours as well. The question, which has been on my mind as well, is there a chance that China will recognize the right to a healthy environment in the Chinese constitution, similar to the UN Human Rights Council's recognition that I mentioned earlier, recognizing the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment?
I think Professor Ben Boer had worked in China for some time. He actually know the situation. In the environmental law community, scholars has discussed the issue of environment, so-called environmental right, for a long time. Okay, and many scholars believe, well, we should have it in our constitution. Okay, but there are also the other scholars, they disagree. I have to tell you the real situation. So, and recently the UN adopted this resolution. I think for Chinese scholar, we need, especially for those who disagree with the idea about putting the concept into our constitution, should carefully study the UN the UN announcement to see to find out how if it is really good for the environmental protection and human rights of China, or it is just how to say, a kind of a symbol, not really caused a real change, a big change in the real life. Okay, so I personally, I cannot predict the government decision, but I think if China voted in favor of this UN decision, the Chinese government will follow that decision, and according to the Chinese legal procedure. Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah.
That's good. That sounds like good news to me. And for those who are wondering about the procedures, Professor Wang is speaking to the fact that following on the UN Human Rights Council resolution, this will now move forward, and we hope for adoption by the UN General Assembly. China, of course, abstained from voting on the UN Human Rights Council resolution, so it will be interesting to see its position moving forward. I wanted to welcome Ms. Nakate back to join us online and to for a few minutes before opening it up to more audience questions, to sort of pose some questions to you both, and also to see if you have any questions for one another, or if you wanted to, anything that you had heard from each other, if you wanted to be in conversation with one another, of course, you'd be welcome to do so. I'll begin with talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, which Professor Wang, you raised the issue of vaccine equity. And, it also brings to mind that the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, environmental degradation is intersecting with multiple other crises. The crisis of obviously public health crisis that is represented by the COVID-19 pandemic, economic crises the world over, and the crisis or the ongoing systemic racism, racial injustice, gender-based injustice, subjugation of indigenous peoples, and other forms of justice against many communities, LGBTQIA communities and others, that is keeping justice from being achieved, or keeping the promise of a right to a healthy environment as something that can be enjoyed by all. In what ways do you think that these intersecting crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic, has shifted environmental law and policy field and the climate justice movement as a whole? Ms. Nakate, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll start by talking about the COVID vaccine and how I think it has really affected when it comes to climate activism. We have the COP26 that is coming up in Glasgow. And during this period of time, the months before November, we've been organizing and writing to organizations to help get as many activists as possible, to get them accreditation to attend the COP. And for those few accreditations that we were able to get, that wasn't like the final challenge of going to the COP, especially for activists from the most affected areas. The other challenge was there are challenges, of course, finding funding, and also challenges of visa processing. But there's also another big challenge, and that was vaccine equity. Many activists were struggling to find access to the vaccine, so that they can be able to travel for the COP. And this was something that, some activists won't be able to go to the COP because they couldn't access vaccination. And these activists are from communities that are least responsible for the climate crisis, that are least responsible for the rise in global temperatures, and yet they won't have their voices represented. They won't have their communities represented. They won't add their voices or, their activism to whatever decisions that the leaders are going to make. For us, it was very important to ensure that every activist across the global south, almost every activist was able to attend the COP. But there's a challenge of vaccine equity. And we see that because of the inequity in how the vaccines were distributed, many activists from the most affected areas, activists at the front lines, activists whose communities didn't cause the climate crisis, activists whose communities are already suffering with loss and damage, they won't be able to tell their stories. Like I said, every activist has a story to tell, and every story has a solution to give, and every solution has a life to change. So people have to look at these things in an intersectional lens. People have to look at these challenges that we are all, if it's getting everyone vaccinated or climate justice or gender equality, we have to look at it with an intersectional lens. We have to think that if an activist won't get vaccinated, they won't be able to talk about the challenges in their communities. So that is one of the ways I can talk about the issue of vaccine equity and climate activism.
And your remarks, Ms. Nakate, they're really, for me, bringing us back to what Professor Wang shared before about responsibility to one's community. There's so many ways with both climate change and the COVID pandemic where we, as a global community, have ultimately failed to realize that we are part of a singular global community, that what happens in one place affects another. And I'm reminded also of, and for those of you who haven't seen it, a really profound Oxfam report on carbon inequality that I'm sure you've seen, showing that the top 10% of top 10 richest portion of the global population is responsible for 50% of the carbon emissions in the world. And conversely, 50% of the poorest are only responsible for 10% emissions. There's deep inequality in that context. And I appreciate your bringing the very real consequences of vaccine inequity to being part of a climate conversation to resolve such a global issue. Professor Wang, your thoughts on that question of how the COVID-19 pandemic and other crises are intersecting with and informing environmental law and policy?
I would like to say 3 points. The first one, the issue or the problem of COVID-19 pandemic. This kind of a problem bring a new challenge to, I would call the state organization capacity. I don't know if it is correct English, or the capacity of a national government to deal with this emergency problem. As far as China, as a Chinese people, including myself, I suffered a lot in the past 1 or 2 years from this pandemic. But I see the government, the way Chinese government to deal with this problem is good and is effective. It shows to some degree a strong capacity of Chinese government to deal with this kind of public problems. I think this may, I don't want to compare to other countries, at least at this moment, China, this big popularized country with big population, we are safe from the pandemic problem, and the Chinese economy now is gradually recover. Okay, and the recovery of Chinese economy is also good the whole world, because China is the second largest economy. You know, so I'm happy to see Chinese government successfully deal with this problem. Okay, this is one point I like to say. And the second one is that this pandemic tell us or remind every human being to respect the nature, to remind us again, we need to respect the nature. This makes me sort of think of the so-called four laws of economy, which I learned when I was a law student in the United States. And the first law is everything is connected to everything else. The second one is everything must go somewhere. And the third one is nature knows best. And this one is particularly related to this pandemic issue. The fourth one is there is no such thing as a free lunch. Okay, so we need to always remember this as a human being, never doing things against the law of the nature. Okay, and the last point I want to say is this pandemic diseases remind every country need to update their policy and the law in order to cope with these new challenges. I'd like to tell you that China recently adopted a law called biodiversity safety, biosafety law. Yeah. And that is a new law. And in addition to that, the Chinese Congress and the administrative department now is amending a number of important environmental laws, such as environmental impact assessment. I personally recently involved in research for this updating, revising of a Chinese environmental impact assessment law. Okay. And this research is, I organize an international research group. And I have a number of American professors as our team member, such as Professor Nick Robinson and Professor Dan Pollock in Chicago, and so on. Altogether about 7 or 8 American environmental law professors from various American universities. And we worked very closely by internet, although we can't see each other during the pandemic diseases time. But by internet, we have a very good discussion. And finally, we made our project report to the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. And we propose in the reports that we propose to put into the new law of climate change, carbon emission, and zoonotic disease. And we suggest that the new environmental impact assessment law should cover the issue of climate change, biodiversity, and the carbon emission and the zoonotic disease. So that is, so this is the last point. We need to update, revise our law to deal with this new challenge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Wang. I wanted to turn now to our attendees and give them an opportunity to ask questions. One question that we have is the first one for you, Ms. Nakate. You're currently working on a project that involves the installation of solar and institutional stoves in schools. What would you say to others who are thinking of undertaking projects such as these? And what kind of support is most effective to assist and expedite projects such as yours on the local and global scale?
Yeah, thank you so much. I started this project in 2019, and it was to drive a transition to renewable energy and also for schools to reduce on the amount of firewood that they use for preparation of food. Almost all schools in my country use firewood for food preparation, but with the eco-friendly cook stoves, it greatly cuts down on the number of firewood that is used by the schools. And when I started the project, I had support to do installations in 5 schools. And while I did those installations, I would share the work that I was doing on social media. I would do like live streaming of the installations and also share pictures and, you know, a Google Drive of where I would share the pictures and all that. And this would really help in transparency for people to see the project and what was happening and to see it at the time when it was happening. So when finally we were coming to the end of the 5 schools, people were already asking questions of how can we support? Do you have a GoFund? And that is when I decided to create a GoFund, and that is how the support really comes in for the project. And so far, we've done installations in 13 schools.
Fantastic. There's something very also, I think, poignant about combining the law and policy work from the top down with the initiatives and led by citizens to advance in environmentally protective measures, especially in the context that you're working on the putting in solar and institutional stoves in schools, which has very direct impacts also on younger peoples and communities who are deeply affected by environmental degradation and pollution. We have a question from Lilian Haub for Professor Wang. China is the fastest growing economy. How does China try to balance economic growth with keeping pollution down? Maybe we could all learn from China's experience in that regard.
Thank you for this question. Generally, I can only give a very general answer to this question. Generally speaking, if we compare to the situation 20 or 30 years ago, the current environmental quality in China is better than before, I would say. Although China still are suffering from a serious pollution problem, but the situation is much better than before, especially the problem for air pollution. Okay, maybe you know a few years ago, China suffering serious haze problems in almost all the big cities of China. But now the haze almost disappeared. And how China achieved that? I think the first reason is the government has decided to make a strong policy about this kind of a polluting industry. Okay. In the recent years, China has vigorously enforced the law against the polluting industry and faced some of the big polluters and changed the productive process of many factories. So clean emission technology have been used. So the haze problem in big cities now almost disappeared. I personally feel good about that. I think for polluters, we have to use a strong regulatory measures. Okay, and times ago, China at the beginning of China started reform. Everybody or every industry, including many local government, they only in favor of economic growth. They didn't pay attention to the price of economic growth. Then, when suffering from the serious haze problem, we realized that we have to take care of the issue of the cost of growth. We have to change the the way of economic growth. And China now is just started to make this change. Okay, and this is so strong government regulation is one reason, and the second one is the environmental awareness of the general people has been increased. Okay, so people support this kind of environmental policy and the law, generally speaking. Yeah, that make the is another big reason for the big change happen. Okay.
I'm actually going to, Ms. Nakate, I'm going to ask you to respond to Professor Wang, and this will be the final question, and then we'll move into the award ceremony. I've seen in a lot of your work and your activism, Professor Wang brought up the issue of economic growth, and Lilian Haub asks us also about growing economies and balancing it with pollution. And Ms. Nakate, you've really brought to the forefront, as have other activists, the idea that we need systems change if we're going to address climate change, including, I believe in what you've talked about, is a systems change shift away from the idea of endless economic growth and other kinds of models that would allow a just and sustainable future. Can you, as our last question, respond to this idea of systems change and whether the current economic growth model is compatible with a livable future? You're muted.
Thank you so much. I want people to first think about the kind of system that we're in and the consequences of the system that we're in. We have seen climate disaster after climate disaster. We have seen inequality after inequality. And this has been birthed from the current system that we're in. And also the current, definition of development that the world has, the current definition of development that people have. I remember in school in my country, when they first discovered oil, I was in primary school, and everyone was so excited, and we were in school and they were teaching us how oil was going to, help the economy, how we were going to see economic progress, we were going to see jobs, but we weren't being told at the expense at which we are going to get these jobs, or the expense at which we are going to get the economic progress. It's later on that I understand the dangers that that oil causes to the people, to the planet, and to the ecosystems in general. It's later on that I understand that it is not the oil that is going to bring us the joy that we are all looking for. It is not the coal that is going to finally bring the jobs that everyone has been looking for. It's not the gas that is going to bring the excitement that finally we can live happily ever after with all of these things. When we realize how much destruction the fossil fuels have caused to the planet and to the lives of the people who are seeing the worst of climate change right now, we realize that development is not development if it includes suffering of people, if it includes destruction of ecosystems, if it includes destruction of biodiversity, loss of lives, loss of farms, loss of businesses. This is what we've seen with development. So let us look at a world whereby economies or governments can still thrive when people's lives and the planet is protected.
I think those are very powerful words on which to conclude this Q&A session. I'm incredibly humbled and honored to have been able to engage in this conversation with you both. As Ms. Nakate reminds us, this is an incredibly important time, not just for action, but for questioning the very basis of our assumptions of what development looks like. And if it is development that comes at such a high cost to people and the planet, then is that the nature and the kind of development that we are pushing for? We're enormously lucky to be aided in this incredibly disruptive and eventful time by such luminaries and by the work that both of you have done. I thank you so much for this conversation. I thank you so much for your efforts. Thank you. It is now my distinct pleasure to welcome Lilian Haub to officially recognize Professor Wang and Vanessa Nakate as our 2021 recipients. Ms. Nakate, you can feel free to keep your camera on. As the official recipients of the Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy. Lilian, who is a member of the Pace University Board of Trustees, is a strong environmental advocate in her own right and represents the Haub family, whose bold commitment to the environment and strong partnership with Pace University and the law school are both symbolized by the medal that we bestow today. Welcome, Lilian.
Thank you, Smita, so much. It is a distinct pleasure to be here with all of you today to present the Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy to two remarkable individuals who have made a tremendous impact in our collective efforts to protect our world's environment. As President Krislov noted, the Elisabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy means a great deal to our family. This award recognizes the innovation, skill, and accomplishments of those who work to sustain and strengthen the world environmental order. We can think of no better tribute to the life and legacy of Elisabeth Haub, the grandmother of my husband, who worked tirelessly to promote an appreciation of nature and the sound stewardship and sustainable development of natural resources. For more than 2 decades, we have recognized the diplomats, policymakers, lawyers, and activists who have sought to protect our environment through the rule of law, the cooperation of world governments, and the group efforts of advocates across the globe. This mission of cooperation in protecting our world has never been more important than now. And so, it is my pleasure to officially welcome Professor Wang of Kunming University of Science and Technology in China and climate justice activist Vanessa Nakate from Uganda as our 2021 laureates. On behalf of the Haub family, please accept my congratulations on this honor, which recognizes your many contributions to the global conversation on environmental protection and climate justice. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Lilian, for your ongoing friendship and support and for your ongoing commitment and your family's commitment to environmental stewardship and protection. I will now ask Professor Wang to begin with just a few minutes of remarks in accepting the award, followed by Ms. Nakate. The image that you are seeing on the screen is of this beautiful award that Professor Nicholas Robinson will also describe to you in the closing remarks and the significance of it, and that we will be shipping to you very soon after the ceremony ends. Professor Wang, the floor is yours. Professor Wang, you are muted.
Sorry. Dear Mrs. Lilian, dear the Haub family, dear the jury of this year's Haub Award, dear President Krislov, dear Dean Anderson, and dear Professor Smita Narula. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you so much. It's a great honor for me to have this year's Haub Award. I'm very happy to see that my work in the area of environmental law has been recognized by the jury. I have noted that all of the previous laureates of the Haub Award are excellent and outstanding people. They have made great contributions to the progressive development of environmental law and environmental diplomacy. So it is a great honor and a prestige for me to be in line with those people. The award is a great encouragement for me. In the 4 decades of my academic career, I was lucky to have many good academic friends from both home and overseas. Due to the time limit of this ceremony, I can only mention 4 of them, namely Professor Han Depei and Professor Liang Xi. Both are my academic supervisors in Wuhan University. And Professor Richard Oettinger and Professor Nicholas Robinson, both are professors in Pace University and my lifetime partner in environmental law. I have made a long list of names to whom I owe a great gratitude. The list covers environmental law institutions and scholars all over the world, especially the ones in China, United States, Germany, Australia, Pakistan, Singapore, Japan, Norway, Netherlands, European Union, UNEP, and IUCN. I will send this name list to Professor Smita Narula and hope it will be put on the website of the Haub Award. I was lucky to have many encouragement and aha moment from academic exchanges with those colleagues and friends. Their encouragement drove me to work hard. The aha moment which I got from my communication with them make me to understand environmental law issue better and better. Today, the Haub Award is no doubt a new and very powerful encouragement for me. It makes me to think about how to work better in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of the Haub Award is to promote environmental law and environmental diplomacy of the world. It symbolizes the real and valuable long version of its founders. The profound challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and the COVID-19 pandemic highlight again and again the indispensable role of environmental law and environmental diplomacy. In the face of this challenge, we should follow the pace of the pioneer laureates and keep in mind the purpose of the Haub Award and work together to strive for a better world which is economically prosperous, ecologically sustainable, culturally protective, and socially justice. I will keep working hard with all of you for achieving the mission of the Haub Award in the future. Thank you, and with the very best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Wang Xi. It is once again indeed an honor to be with you today and to bestow this award. Ms. Nakate, I welcome you to the screen, and we have a photo of the award that will also be making its way over to you once our ceremony concludes. I now warmly invite you to share some thoughts in accepting this award.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be speaking with all of you today. My name is Vanessa Nakate, and I am a climate justice activist from Kampala, Uganda. I started doing activism in the first week of January 2019 And I started by striking every Friday for the climate and demanding for climate justice. Why did I start activism? I did research and saw how much the climate crisis was affecting the lives of the people in my community. I saw how much the people were facing some of the worst impacts of climate change because of the rising global temperatures. I had already seen these things on the news, but I couldn't make the connection to the climate crisis. But once I did make that connection, I decided to become a voice in the climate justice. With the rising global temperatures, the people in my country are facing extreme weather conditions, and this means extreme rainfall and extreme droughts. So for us, the climate crisis means extreme droughts for people. It means landslides and floods that are causing massive destruction, that are causing massive suffering and massive loss of livelihoods for very many people. But this doesn't just end in Uganda. It cuts across to other countries across Africa. Historically, Africa is responsible for only 3% of global emissions, and yet Africans are already suffering some of the worst brutal impacts fueled by the climate crisis. Cyclone Idai was one of the worst cyclones to affect the African continent, ripping apart large parts of Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, leaving more than 1,300 people dead and many more recorded as missing. This is just one of the disasters that we have seen in the African continent. Many people continue to lose their lives. Many continue to lose their farms. Many continue to lose their businesses because of the increased global temperatures. This is why I rise up for the people. This is why I rise up for the planet, because the future is scary. The present itself is catastrophic. But I know that the voices of the people, the actions of the people can change the future that we shall inherit. I dream and see a future that is livable, a future that is sustainable, a future that is clean, a future that is healthy, a future that is equitable for all of us, where the people can smile, where the planet can smile, where the ecosystems can thrive. But I can't do this alone. We can't do this alone. We need everyone on board to rise up for the people. We need everyone on board is a planet. This is because we may be facing the same storm, the climate crisis, and we are definitely in different boats. But this doesn't exempt anyone from climate change. I may be experiencing the climate crisis right now, but one way or another, you will end up experiencing it as well. Like Professor Wang said, everything is connected to everything else. This is one system. It is all connected. If one part of the system is broken, then the rest of other parts will eventually collapse and break as well. So it's important for us to fight for everything, to fight together, because I know when we work together, when we work united, we can be able to transform this world and make it a better place for all of us. So I would like to thank all of you for honoring me with this award. Of course, it came unexpectedly and I wasn't expecting this. And I just want to say thank you for honoring me with this award, for honoring the work that I'm doing, but not just the work that I'm doing, but the work that many activists across the world, many activists across the global south, in Africa and in Uganda are doing. This award is not just mine alone. To me, it's for all of us who are rising up, who are speaking up for the people, who are speaking up for the planet, and ensuring that we can achieve something that is beautiful in the future. I know another world is necessary, but I also know that another world is possible. And if we work together, if we work united, we can make this world possible. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nakate, and also for that resounding reminder that that you are standing in for the many activists who are on the front lines calling for climate justice and calling for systems change. I want to thank both of our laureates. I invite Professor Wang back on the screen for your remarks, for your commitment, for your efforts, and for joining us today. It has been an incredible and profound honor to be part of celebrating your many, many contributions to international environmental law, activism, and diplomacy. And before inviting Professor Robinson to share some closing remarks, I would like to share a round of thanks. This event would not have been possible without the commitment and hard work of many individuals. Our thanks, first and foremost, of course, go to our laureates for their tireless efforts and steadfast commitment to protecting the environment, both in the fastest growing economy in the world and on the continent that will likely feel the greatest impacts and is already feeling the greatest impacts of climate change. If there are three things that I will take away from this conversation, which will stay with me, I think, for a lifetime, it is that we are indeed all deeply connected. We must proceed as though we have a responsibility to our community, and we cannot simply be left with feeling inspired, but we must take action now. Our thanks also to Lilian Haub and the Haub family for their steadfast support. We thank the distinguished members of the Haub Award jury, President Krislav, Dean Anderson, and Professor Robinson, and to all of our attendees. I thank my students for pushing me and teaching me every day, my colleagues as well who have joined our conversation, and for their many, many tireless efforts behind the scenes. We thank Ariana Andrusko, Greg Likens, Claire McLeod, Ann Olson, Lorraine Rubich, Rachel Silva, Tony Suarez, and Professor Achinti Vitanage. And finally, we thank you all for joining us today. I would now like to invite Professor Nicholas Robinson, a prior recipient of this award and university professor on the environment, and Gilbert and Sarah Curlin, Distinguished Professor Emeritus, to join our laureates on screen and share some closing remarks, as well as some more information about the beautiful award that they are about to receive in the mail. Thank you so much. And that is being shown here on the screen. Professor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Professor Narula. It's a humbling honor to be with our laureates today. They are part of an intergenerational succession of individuals who literally have built the laws that protect and sustain our environment around the globe. The award is old enough now to be intergenerational. The symbol for the award was selected by the International Council of Environmental Law early on in 1969 in New Delhi. It is one of the oldest symbols of law that our humanity has envisioned and created. It's the Dharmachakra from Buddhism, but it's a universal symbol too. It recognizes the continuous circle of law that connects us all, as both our laureates have indicated. The Haub family, when Elisabeth Haub launched this award, and the Haub family has renewed it and continued it, wanted the symbol to continue. It continues in a sustainable way, having been crafted each year individually by an artist. It is renewable metals. The symbol of the ribbon and the gold are the colors of Pace University. It has a tradition of recognizing that environmental law is essential, and therefore the legal side of environmental law, which began also with the Université Libre de Bruxelles and then Stockholm University, but then also the diplomatic side, that international law is made by many non-lawyers, by diplomats. That was launched at Pace University. And the Haub family united both of these awards into one, which we celebrate today. Professor Wang for his lifetime work building environmental law, as the past law laureates have. The Environmental Law Award here is the oldest and most important of the awards for law and the environment. And then for diplomacy. And just as last year when the jury innovated by honoring the defenders of the environment who have given their lives, their ultimate gift to save the planet, This year, we honor citizen diplomats. That diplomacy is not just made in the halls of the United Nations. It is made as citizens find a common vision and are activated by the leadership of people like Vanessa Nakate to build the new legal frameworks across nations that will sustain life on the planet. So as we celebrate next year the 50th anniversary of the 1972 United Nations Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, where international environmental law really was deemed to have broken into the international scene, and indeed in many nations it became the beginning of shaping a new body of law. It's auspicious that we honor these two individuals today with the Elisabeth Haub Award. The Elisabeth Haub Award gives us hope. It gives us hope that in an intergenerational way, a succession of persons who understand the environmental rule of law in its deepest sense will help move us forward to sustain life on the planet. I congratulate the laureates. I thank again all those who made this ceremony possible. We wish we would be able to hand each laureate the award in person, but this will be done vicariously as they come. And then sometime in the future, when the laureates can unite again, we will have a chance to reflect and gather. Meanwhile, I wish everyone in this ceremony and those attending from around the world well, and we hope to see you again with the award ceremony in another year. Thank you very much.